I'm speaking on expectations. And I am learning a lot about expectations and how they affect my life day to day. And I want to talk about two avenues of that this morning: the expectations that we have of people and the expectations that we have of God. And I find for me that a lot of times unrealistic expectations get me into trouble. I feel like a lot of times I expect a lot out of people and not enough out of God. And that gets me into trouble. And so I think we can also expect a lot out of our circumstances and not enough out of God. And so I want to dive into that a little bit this morning. Recently, within just the week before last, I came face to face with some expectations that I had in my children. And the way that came out was I got locked in our bathroom. Dean was at work, and it had been like a little bit of a tricky doorknob. We have a 105-year-old house, and so things get sketchy. And we had friends, their children from Edmonton were down and staying at our house, so I had like another 3 children in my house, and I was locked in the bathroom. And so I'm like yelling to my children who are all running around joyously playing. I'm like, guys, Mom's locked in the bathroom. I need a screwdriver. I need someone to like take the doorknob off. And so I hear like rummage, rummage, rummage for like 20 seconds. I'm like, sorry, Mom, can't find the screwdriver. And then they just went off and played. And I was like, what? Like my firstborn, he's 11. Responsible individual who should love his mom. And I just came face to face with this reality that in an emergency, this was what I could expect from him. I expected rescuing. I expected at least sitting by the door and like consoling Mom so that she doesn't get claustrophobic, because our bathroom be tiny, people. It's tiny. So I was like, okay. Hannah and Nora, the 3-year-old, did come to help me out. And I'm trying to yell, and we have like 3 stories, right? And they're in the basement. I'm like, that was not good enough. You can't be done. I actually need you to find the screwdriver. Like, I can't stay in here. You have to actually do what I said. He's just off. He's like, I can't find it. Mom, ah. So as I'm texting Dean to be like, dude, where's the screwdriver? I need to give these kids like some information on where to find it. I start rummaging through the bathroom, and Dean had hidden an emergency screwdriver. Job, Dean. This guy is an amazing in emergency, let me tell you that. So I proceed to start taking apart the doorknob, and I take out the entire doorknob, and Hannah's there, and she's poking her eye in there at me, and I'm like, okay, take this part out. And then the latch is still completely stuck in the door jamb, and nothing I do is like making it move. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm looking for the hinges. They're on the other side of the door. So I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so stuck in here. So I was close. I was stuck for close to 20 minutes. And I finally told Dean, like, look, there are other people's children at my house. I was Insta-storying the whole thing, so I felt connected to the outside world. Like Danny in Edmonton knew that her children were trapped in my house without supervision. So I'm texting Dean, and I'm like, can you come and save me? Because I can get out, but I'm going to have to break the door. And I feel like maybe you have a solution. So he's like, yeah, I'll come. And then I just tried one more try to like reef in there and just like completely pry it open. And I got out. I was saved. Yay. So thankful. Ended up locking my keys in the truck at the sled hill later that day, and had to have borrow a friend's vehicle to go get the keys from Dean. And then later that day, I was like, this has been a rough day. I am just going to go in the hot tub, and I ripped my hot tub cover in half. So the opening and closing of things that day were not on my side. I feel like there's a greater lesson to this story in that it's okay to bring the phone to the bathroom, because you don't know if you're going to get stuck in there, and you are going to have to call your husband because your children don't seem to care that you're locked in the bathroom. We could probably just leave it right there. Life hacks from Monique. So, I'm learning that expectations are an internal thing and they are a communication thing. We had to have a communication after that incident that if mommy is locked in the bathroom, I expect you to drop what you're doing and come and help me. Now, had I gotten comfortable, started like scrolling through Instagram, having a grand old time by myself, I am sure they would have broke that door down, because that's just science. If there's a mom at peace somewhere, kids will get in. They'll get there. I know better to try that next time. Okay? But I want to go through a few practical suggestions for dealing with expectations with people. And then we're going to talk about with God. First is, it's not wrong to have expectations of people in your life. But the people in your life have the ability and the right and the option to choose not to meet them. So we need to get used to that, and we need to be realistic about that. Unless you're my children and I want the house cleaned by a certain time, you just have to do that. But I feel like a lot of angst and miscommunication and offense and hurt comes from uncommunicated expectations. So I feel like we need to really grab hold of, like, people are not mind readers. I am not a mind reader. You are not a mind reader. People cannot read your mind or your expectations. So if you have expectations, we can do one of two things. A is let them know our expectation, and then see if they're willing to meet it. Then you go from there. Or B, you can determine and look at it critically and say, is this a fair expectation? And if you choose not to verbalize that expectation, then I feel like you need to choose to let it go. Because if you're not willing to communicate expectations to people, you shouldn't expect them to meet them. So we need to be realistic in our expectations. The second one is unrealistic expectations. A lot of times I think we don't even know that we have expectations until they're unmet. And then we're like, whoa, I don't like this feeling. I don't like what I'm going through right now. I think if we get to the root of our discomfort or our hurt or our anger, we'll often find that there is an unmet expectation sitting there. God's been like on a season of just showing me this over and over and over, and I'm just like, whoa, girl's got a lot of expectations. I have many of them. I like to get my way. So many days I expect our school days, to go smoothly and filled with like joyous learning, because I've put effort into creating these like engaging lessons, and I've like made it fun, and sometimes you just got to do the hard work. And it throws me for a complete loop when all these plans and lovely activities just get thrown in the garbage because of my kid's bad mood, or they have a temper, or they have an unmet expectation, or they're hungry, and everything falls apart. Okay, I expect that like my joyous learning will trump whatever's going on in their inner world, and it's just not realistic. And I'm having to learn to like get in tune with that. I asked Hannah after we ripped the hot tub cover in half what she would say about expectations, because we've been dealing with expectations in the whole family. And she says, you don't always get what you expect. Sometimes your expectation was right, but that doesn't mean it'll always be right. When things don't go your way, instead of crying and screaming, you should get cuddles. So I think that's good advice from Hannah. Instead of crying and screaming, and I think it was interesting that she's like, well, sometimes my expectations are right. So then I think I should be able to expect that all the time. And I was like, oh, that's a key into her mind and how that's working. And I thought that was pretty in-depth for a 9-year-old. So I'm not in any way, shape, or form saying that we should expect the worst in people or in life, but I think we should be realistic. And I think there's a big difference between expecting the best in someone and believing the best in someone. Because when we believe the best about someone, we can do that by believing that they're not out to get us, they're not out to hurt us, they're doing their best, they might be having an off day, they're in process. I think a lot of marital disagreements could be solved by believing the best in each other. We have even started to, in the middle of a fight, be like, I don't know if you're believing the best about me right now. You sound pretty defensive. And I feel like we both say it. I just want you to believe the best in me right now while I'm preaching. I think this contrasts with when we're expecting the best, because the best is pretty relative, and the best is based on our expectations and viewpoint of what is the best. And so when we're expecting them to behave exactly how we want them to, it's oftentimes unrealistic. And also, I think that we're expecting people to act completely out of character, right? It's like expecting my kids to be able to get their stuff on and get outside the door in 3 minutes. Like, that's just completely out of character. I'm just crazy for even expecting that. It's just way better if I just give them 15 minutes to get ready and get out the door, instead of rushing and expecting they're 9 and 11, they should be able to do this when they've just never done it. I feel like even in church life, we can sometimes get in this swirl of expectations and feel unsupported, or feel like, well, nobody's doing anything for the kingdom, or nobody's doing this, or why don't we have this ministry in the church, and why don't we have this ministry in the church? But what's really happening, I think, in our hearts is that other people don't have the passion to do what's in your heart to do. But we're expecting everybody, if we love Jesus, to have the same passions and avenues that we express that. And that's not realistic. And I get that that gets tricky when we're in a position where what we want to see happen requires participation from other people. But we do still have to look and see, because I bet you any money that there is something that they are passionate about. It might not be what you're passionate about, but that's okay. The next suggestion I have is learning to let things go. I don't like to let things go. Laying down our expectations is very hard work, because they feel very, very justified. And sometimes our expectations may be very healthy and positive and good for everyone. And so we feel, I feel like there's a spy coming. It's like Mission Impossible. I recently shared a blog post called "One Thing Guaranteed to Wreck Your Day," and it was about expectations. I don't know why my kids insist on wrecking my day. I feel oftentimes how Michael Scott feels about Toby. So Nicolene, if you're able to roll that clip, if it's going to work in Jesus' name.
Why are you the way that you are? Honestly, every time I try to do something fun or exciting, you make it not that way. I hate so much about the things that you choose to be.
Oh my gosh, I don't hate anything about my children, but I feel it in my bones. Why are you the way that you are? Why, when I try to do anything fun, do you try to wreck it? I can have this fun, engaging lesson planned out where we're walking through nature and we're playing games and we're collecting things for art activities, and everything will fall apart because one child took the stick that another child wanted in a forest full of sticks. And everything just goes downhill. And I'm just like, why are you making easy things hard? But I'm just learning and I'm experimenting, what happens if I learn to let some things go? Okay, or we're hiking through the Rocky Mountains, and there's glorious beauty around us in every way, and our children are literally flailing themselves on the side of the road with hikers with bells passing them by. And I am nervous that Child Protective Services is going to be called, because we are torturing them by exposing them to this grand majesty of creation and having them hike up a mountain. And as soon as they stop and we're like, okay, take a rest, they start climbing trees. So they are not tired, they're bored. And we are evil because we caused their boredom. It's ridiculous sometimes. And so in my natural personality and how I've developed, I want to push through. You know that about me. We can do hard things. Let's push through. Get to the top of this mountain. Finish this watercolor activity. I'll stop and I'll deal with their hearts, but then we're going to get stuff done. But I'm learning this is not always working for me. because I still just like get this unmet expectation rage in me. So on one such day where all three of us were losing our minds with unmet expectation rage, a song started going through my head. And Nicolene's going to play that song now.
You got to know when to hold 'em, know when to fold 'em, know when to walk away, know when to run. You never count your money. When you're sitting at the table, there'll be time enough for counting. When the deal is done, you got to know when to hold 'em, know when to fold 'em.
Take us to church, Kenny.
Know when to walk away, know when to run. You never count your money. When you're sitting at the table, there'll be time enough for counting. When the deal is done.
Now, to be honest, I had expectations that we would all join that and have like this like moment, spontaneous Holy Spirit. The front row joined, and Chrissy. Okay, but it was just like so Holy Spirit in that moment where Kenny Rogers was just blasting through my head, and the Holy Spirit was saying, Monique, you got to know when to hold them, you got to know when to fold them, you got to know when to walk away, you got to know when to run. You don't always have to hold them. And I was like, and so I like literally blast that song now. Like if my children walk by my bedroom and I'm blaring Kenny Rogers with my hands in the air, they know Mom is dealing with expectations. Okay? Hannah joins right in. She's like, just yes, let it go. Okay? We need to learn to lay down our expectations and how to give and receive grace and trust the process and trust the one who never fails us. 1 Corinthians 13, the love chapter, reminds us, love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. There's many translations of that, and I love them all, but this one from the ESV stuck out because it had that phrase, love does not insist on its own way. And I realize how much I insist on my own way because I like my way, and my way is good. Now, I want to shift our focus into from expectations of people into expectations of God. Lamentations 3, verses 21 to 25 says, "But this I recall, and therefore I have hope and expectation. It is because of the Lord's mercy and loving kindness that we are not consumed, because his tender compassions fail not. They are new every morning. Great and abundant is your stability and faithfulness. The Lord is my portion and my inheritance, says my soul. Therefore I have hope in him, and I wait expectantly for him. The Lord is good to those who wait confidently for him, to those who seek him." We can and we should expect big things from God, much more than we should ever expect from people. But it doesn't mean that we should expect anything we want from God. Because sometimes our expectations box God in our minds. I don't believe he's ever actually boxed in, but I think that we miss out on things, miss out on recognizing his solutions and his provisions because we have narrowed our expectations. So I want to talk about a guy in the Old Testament, and I'm not going to read it verbatim. I'm just going to paraphrase his story. But we're going to talk about Naaman from 2 Kings chapter 5. Now, in Crystal's Revelation Wellness meetup, she also spoke on Naaman, and it kind of triggered me to like look into his story a little more, and then I kind of missed some of what she was saying because I kind of got sucked into journaling through some of my own stuff that morning. So if anything's similar, my apologies. But Naaman is a guy from the Old Testament, and he was a Syrian army commander, and he was very highly honored. He was used to getting his own way, and he was this great commander with a ton of victories, but he had leprosy. Now, leprosy in those days was a hopeless sentence. right? It was completely, there's no cure, you're very contagious, so you can't be around people, and it was not good. So he has this young slave girl who he has stolen from Israel, okay, in his home, this Israelite girl, and she says, you should go see this prophet in Samaria. He'd heal you from this disease. And so Naaman's like very intrigued. And so he goes to the king of his country, and he's like, what do you think? Should I go? And the king's like, yeah, absolutely. Like, if you can be healed, you should go. So the king agrees, and he sends him with like a ton of money and gifts. I think when I looked at it, there was like, is the equivalent of millions of dollars today. And so Naaman goes with his servants and with the king's gifts, and he goes to the king of Israel. And he says, like, look, I've heard that I can be healed here. I've brought all these money and gifts. And the king of Israel freaks out because he's like, I have no way to heal you. And now I feel like I'm in a trap because you've come here, you're already our enemy, and now I just feel like I'm going to be trapped in this situation. And so the king of Israel is freaking out. But Elisha hears about this, and so he goes to the king of Israel and says, hey, don't freak out about this. Send Naaman to me, and I will show him that there is a prophet of God in this kingdom. And so Naaman heads towards Elisha's house, and Elisha sends out a messenger with instructions. Notice, Elisha didn't come out himself. He sent a messenger to meet Naaman halfway. And the messenger says, Elisha the prophet says, wash 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh will be restored, and you'll be cleansed. Woohoo! This is great news. It's fantastic news. But Naaman is ticked off. He is angry. He says, I thought he would surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God and wave his hand over the spot and cure me of leprosy. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the rivers of Israel? Couldn't I wash in them and be cleansed? And then he went off in a rage. Look like any of us? When God doesn't do it exactly how we say? I'm just so intrigued by how specific Naaman is. Like, he has big expectations of God, rightly so, but he has very narrow expectations of God. And Naaman almost missed his miracle because of his expectations. And that begs the question, can we relate? Do we miss out on what God is doing, on the miracles he has for us, on the provisions and the solutions in our life because of our own expectations? Do we have dreams and callings that we feel God isn't doing anything about because he's not doing it in the way that you think he should? That right there is a tricky place of tension for me to live in. Because I have dreams. I have things that I believe God wants to use me for. I have things that fill me with passion and excitement. And it's very tricky for me to live in this place of contentment in the current season, but also be pushing and pursuing what else God has for me. Because I think we have to be able to live in both of those places. It's like a Venn diagram when you got to live in the middle. So many things have not come about how I expected. I started preaching and speaking when I was 16 in my awesome home church in Hepburn. I lived in a town of 2 Mennonite churches and a Mennonite Bible college. Okay, so I got to start speaking there. Come graduation, a lot of my friends went to Bible college, and some of the students at that Bible college that was in our town of 500 people would jokingly mock me for going away to U of R rather than going to Bible school like the rest of my friends. Now, I wanted to go hard after the things of God, and it seemed very natural to go to Bible school like everybody else was doing, but I had this opportunity to go to the U of R. I was given a full ride scholarship. I knew I wanted to be a teacher, so why delay it? So I decided to go to U of R. Now, long story short-ish, that scholarship led to an offer to play Cougar volleyball. And so I got to be on that team. And that position on that team led me to a position with Athletes in Action, where I got a ton of leadership and speaking experience. I got to do stuff all the time at big events, and it was such a growing time for me. Then that position with AIA led me to running volleyball camps all over the province, and a couple of them were here in Estevan. Now, funny side note, I would not have taken that job to run the volleyball camps in the province had I not been really mad at Dean that week. We were not back together yet, and he was really ticking me off, and I was like, and I had lined up a house for free that I was going to house sit for another staff member in Athletes in Action. It was in Saskatoon, so we were going to be able to spend some time together, see where this thing went. And then I just was so mad at him that I took the job traveling all summer rather than be in the same city as him. Now, we, eventually still ended up together. Okay, so then I didn't know where Estevan was. I didn't know it existed, but I came down here running volleyball camps. And then people were like, you should come and teach here. So I ended up coming to teach here. And then I still wasn't actually even going to teach here. I was just going to be like, well, I might work for the church for a little bit instead. And then I got a message on my answering machine that said, your contract is ready to be signed at the school division office. And I had another phone call from a friend being like, I'm so excited you're teaching at Spruce Ridge. And I was like, what? I did not ask for a job. I don't know how it happened. My name was just on all the stuff. So I was like, well, okay, I guess I'll take this job. So then I started doing that. This camp, where I was billeted, brought us to this church. And we, Dean and I kind of church hopped when we got here and stuff like that, but who I lived with was a member of this church. Remember, we're from Mennonite church. And so we came and we tried out this crazy Pentecostal church where people did weird things like lifting their hands and speaking in tongues, and we decided to stay. And we love this church, and now I'm the crazy one doing all those things. So none of that was how I expected. And it continues to be in that fashion, where God plants something in my heart, but then it just I'm like, oh, wouldn't it be nice if he just did it like this? And he's just like, oh, I like this better. Okay? And that's just kind of typical, right? It's just kind of how things go. But we can't expect God to move in a certain way. We have to be open to him. The rest of the story is that the servant then asked Naaman, well, if Elisha had told you to do some huge, great thing, you would have done it. So why not just try this? So Naaman goes, and he plunged himself into the river seven times, and he was healed. The miracle required Naaman's participation. And I always think that's interesting because there are so many miracles in the Bible that require people's participation. Lazarus, take off his grave cloths, unbind him, take up your mat and walk, dunk yourself in the Jordan. Okay? That's a challenge to me because I don't want to miss out on what God wants to do, how he will provide or the solutions that he has for my circumstances just because of my own expectations. I want to be continually walking in obedience, and so that I'm doing my part of the solution. It's like having a financial crisis. And your dad says, don't worry, I'm sending you a suitcase full of money. Just be at the airport. And you're sitting at the baggage claim, and it's not coming, and it's not coming, and it's not coming, and you start getting hurt, and you're resenting your dad because he didn't come through like you provided, but it's just sitting in the other baggage claim. You're just at the wrong place. Okay, so we need to be open to what God is doing. How can we do this? Well, I think the first thing is humility. We see that very quickly in Naaman's situation. He was offended that that the prophet had not come out to meet him. He was offended by what seemed like ridiculous expectations, and so he had to humble himself and still choose to go and participate in the way he was asked to. We need to recognize that God's ways are not our ways. And even if we think we have the best solution, the best way to do it, he's God, and he is way better at this than we are. We need to learn to let go and to trust God, and that takes humility. With God and with people, because a lot of times our expectations with people are still based on our own idea of what is best, and it takes humility to understand that other people don't share our expectations. That other people have expectations of their own, and ours aren't necessarily the right way or the only way to do something. The second one is obedience. What Elisha told Naaman to do was weird. Okay? Why was it necessary to dunk yourself in the river 7 times? Okay? I like the idea of waving the hand over the leprosy and poof, gone. Sounds like a good idea. Okay? But it required obedience. And obedience led Naaman into his promise. And I believe it's the same way in our life. I believe obedience will lead us into the promises of God. The third one is we need to have bigger expectations. Ephesians 3:20 is one of my favorites, and it says, "Never doubt God's mighty power to work in you and accomplish all of this. He will achieve infinitely more than your greatest request, your most unbelievable dream, and exceed your wildest imagination. He will outdo them all, for his miraculous power constantly energizes you." We can expect good. We can expect exceedingly abundantly more. We can expect abundance. We can expect healing. We can expect the unexpected in a good way. He's going to surprise us. There's always a solution. That's something we say over and over and over in our house. There is always a solution. We say it when the kids have an issue. Dean says it to me when I have an issue. There is always a solution. We have to believe in a God who always has a solution. It's a really great way, as well as renewing our minds, to come alongside with the truth. When we constantly affirm there is always a solution, that trains our brain. That when situations arise, we can go, oh, here's a situation, God has a solution. The fourth one is get curious. God is speaking to me so much about curiosity as well lately. I think if we can foster curiosity in our spirit, we will just draw so many less assumptions and be in wonder more. I think that when we're curious, we become so much more observant. Right? When we have a narrow expectation, we're looking at this path. And we're like, okay, I'm waiting for God to show up here. But when we're curious, we're looking around. We're like, oh, well, I wonder where. Is he going to show up here? Is he going to do it like this? Oh, what's over here? Can I see him moving? And we just start to get observant. We can expect an answer. We just don't know what it is yet. And I wonder what our first reaction, what it would be like if all of our first reactions were to bad news were, well, I wonder how God's going to provide. I wonder what part I'll play. I wonder what his abundant solution is. Wouldn't it be fun to just be curious like a kid? Well, how are we going to fix that? Like when we break down on the side of the road, like my kids don't go into a panic mode. They're like, oh, how are we going to fix this? Right? Who's going to come get us? Like they're just curious about it. And I think if we can get back to that childlike wonder and that curiosity ourselves, that we'll miss less of what God is doing. I don't think a lot gets by curious people. God is surprising and delightful. He's always revealing bits and pieces of his character. But he doesn't always do it in the same way. So we need to be humble. We need to know that he knows what he's doing. We need to walk in obedience and steward what we have before us, steward the next step, steward the opportunities to grow and move forward, steward our time and our finances, and keep obeying and stay curious. The results? Well, Naaman got his promise. He got his miracle and he was fully healed. It also became a major life marker for him. It became a massive faith builder. He said, now I know there is no other God besides the God of Israel. It marked him for life. Will anyone or any circumstance ever be able to take away that faith? No. That experience and that conviction are there for him, and it's an everlasting treasure. It's like they say, or Bill Johnson says, a person with theology has no argument against a person with experience. These things, when we choose to believe and we walk in obedience and we expect from God and we see him answer, those become markers in our life. And they become foundations and faith that's built into our lives. And nobody can take that away. No argument can say, well, God doesn't come through because I'm like, he's come through for me every single time. How can you say he doesn't come through? I've never experienced different. I'll invite the worship team up. So when we humble ourselves and we walk in obedience, expect big things, and get curious, we will encounter God in ways that mark our lives. And it opens us up to so many great things.